All right. Welcome everyone. I'm just going to give it a few seconds, but please, as we do, wait just a little bit before we get started. If you want to go ahead and start putting your name, where you're from, introducing yourself, all that fun into the chat, please do. And there is some information on the screen, just kind of going over a welcome to the session, code of conduct, and all that fun. And we'll get started just a second. And I almost literally meant just a second. I want to make sure we respect your time. So let's go ahead and get started. Hello, and thank you all so much for joining us for this session. My name is Patricia Hernandez, and I'll be moderating this session. I'm glad to welcome Jamie Hazlitt. I practiced and everything and still kind of semi got it wrong, but Jamie Hazlitt and Kathryn Ryan, and they will be presenting Lowering the Stakes, Raising the Impact, regular check-ins for strategic plan success. Before we do get started, though, let's go over a few logistical items. So to start off, this session is being recorded. We also would like you to please use the Q&A feature for any presentation questions. You can choose to do this anonymously if you'd like. There will be a 10 to 15 minute session for the Q&As at the end of the presentation. Please go ahead and use the chat for any general comments that you have or technical issues. Chris Rutolo will be monitoring the chat for any questions and comments. Chris will also be adding some links into the chat as you may already be seeing. One is for collaborative resource sharing. If you can think of a related reading, podcast, video, or something else, please share it with us in Calm's resource Zotero or in the chat. One of our volunteers will drop this information in the chat. The next link that we will be sharing soon, if we haven't already, I didn't see. The next link is for the code of conduct, so we can reference to that as needed. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to our presenters, and take it away.
Kathryn, you muted.
Sorry, that ran away from me. Hi, everyone. I'm Kathryn Ryan, she, her. I'm the Assistant Dean for Library Operations at the William H. Hannon Library at Loyola Marymount University. I've worked at LMU in various positions for 16 years, and in library administration specifically for a little over 6 years.
Yeah, and I'm Jamie Hazlitt. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the former associate dean at Hannon Library at LMU. My current role, where I've been for about 18 months, is the director of teaching and learning services at the University of California, Los Angeles Library. Our presentation today is about a strategic planning process for the library at LMU, which is a mid-sized R2 private university with a single library with 45 staff members, and 22 of them are librarians, that serves a largely residential campus community of approximately 7,000 undergraduates and 1,800 graduate students. But a major part of the motivation for our proposal today is how I've been thinking about applying the process that we developed and that Kathryn and the current LMU leadership continue to refine to a really different size and scale of organization, and also from a different positionality than a top level administrator. So I hope that those of you who are here today might find some ideas that might resonate and connect to the unique needs of your institution also. So speaking of unique needs of institution, we've got a little poll, and I'm going to pop this up right now. So we'd love to see who's here. Does your library have a strategic plan? And how often do you think about it? And if you have additional kind of comments or feelings or vibes about strategic planning that you'd like to kind of post in the chat about, why you're here today, what you're interested in, that sort of thing, we'd love to see that too. All right, we've got a good mix of administrators, department heads. Love to see the individual contributors who are interested in the plan. Yes, lots of libraries with strategic plans. That's awesome. My apologies to the 20% of you who get to think about this all the damn time. Okay. looks like our responses are starting to slow down. So, all right.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Let me move to the,
These are our, let me do the little,
oh
you
yeah,
can see our results here too.
see the
So,
results.
yeah.
So a lot of administrators and department heads and a lot of strategic plans, obviously, which makes sense. Okay. Okay, just a second, sorry. There we go. So as we're going through this presentation, we do encourage you to share reactions or share your thoughts in the chat if what we're sharing resonates with you. In our experience, strategic planning can be a challenge in libraries, even with the involvement of those who know the work inside and out. The planning process can feel arduous and repetitive. Strategic planning uses business speak that may be rare otherwise in library jobs. And finally, it can be a real challenge to accomplish your goals, or maybe even remember what your goals were over the course of the plan. We'd experienced this at LMU as well. This period of time, 2008 to 2020, covered about 2 previous strategic plan cycles for our university. So historically, we had some strengths around our strategic planning at LMU. All staff at the library were involved in the unit level strategic planning process, usually at multiple points in the planning process. In addition to department discussions about the strategic plan, we typically had all staff retreats to plan for the strategic plan, which allowed us to mix up staff and to share perspectives. These retreats usually had an element of fun, like a themed one around space missions and NASA with Jamie's table captain name tag shown here. Um, and then LMU staff also tend to have a really strong connection to our university mission. So we benefited from that connection to help us tie our unit level plan to the university's core principles and goals. There were some challenges, though. University strategic planning cycles varied. Our strategic plan that ended in 2020 was about 7 years long, and the one before that was 5 years. The plans tended to have a lot of updates or refreshes involved, so we would plan the first couple of years in detail, and then after that, there would be another set of all staff retreats to plan update the plan again. We ended up having all staff meetings about every couple years on average. Another difficulty was around strategic planning itself. It's often a challenge to define what's strategic versus what's operational in library work, especially when it feels like many of us are doing very similar work day to day. Strategic can also feel like a value judgment. Staff whose work was mostly operational felt left out of goals and objectives, even as they still attended the all staff meetings to update the plan. We also tended to see silos with these plans. Departments developed many of their objectives and actions separately and then reported on those outcomes over the course of the plan, again, as departments. Our annual reporting to the university was more of a narrative highlights reel of our annual accomplishments, where we would make connections to the university strategic plan, but it was not as detailed as in terms of our unit level plan progress. So there was often a mismatch between library department accomplishments and what made sense to promote at the university level. And then finally, our librarian annual review process is highly narrative. And although there were broad parameters in terms of breaking out one's work in relation to performance, service, and professional development, along with demonstrating the impact of one's work, connecting that work to the library or the university's strategic plan was not required. So some librarians and department heads did so, and others, it was not a consistent practice across the board. Enter 2021. So this was the first year that Jamie joined us as the Associate Dean in Library Administration. And in addition to our work reopening the library, which included moving hundreds of chairs around and designing and enforcing library masking policies, this year marked the beginning of our journey to reshape Hannon Library's strategic plan. The library's prior strategic plans had been connected to the cycles of the university's strategic plan, and this time around was no different. After a couple of cycles of short-term plan refreshes, in May 2021, the Board of Trustees approved a new 5-year plan for the university, which included a significant shift toward institutional integration of DEIA across all functions and units. As we embarked on this next cycle of strategic planning, we were heavily inspired by an article that Kathryn and Kathryn Cott from Cal State Northridge published in the Journal of Library Administration in 2017, which is linked in our resources, where they shared their experience of using a methodology called appreciative inquiry to engage staff and library stakeholders in collaboratively shaping a new strategic plan. Appreciative inquiry invites participants to use a dialogic approach to imagine a desired future state. In contrast with the SWOT, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis methodology that we had used in previous planning cycles in the library, we valued the positive orientation of appreciative inquiry as a framework. The process we adapted from the Cal State Northridge team was the 4D cycle, with 4 phases: discover, dream, design, and deliver. We kicked off the discover and dream phase of the process in November 2021 with a series of departmental exercises at the library. At these department meetings, we invited staff to contribute to an Etherpad, which is an outstanding open source note-taking tool that allows for anonymous contributions. We set up one Etherpad for each department and identified a facilitator for each session who is responsible for moving the participants through the exercise and timekeeping. Here you'll see the prompts that we invited each individual to respond to. So the first section was to discover. What are we currently doing in the library? As succinctly as possible, list the tasks, projects, or initiatives that you currently work on and which contribute to the success of your department. And then second, dream. What could we do? Make a list of any new tasks, projects, initiatives, or problems to solve that you would like the library to undertake in the next 3 to 5 years. Think big. There are no right or wrong answers. And here are excerpts from 2 of the Etherpads from those departmental exercises. There were no restrictions on the level of granularity or weight to any particular task, project, or initiative that participants elected to capture, and these reflect only a small portion of the length of some of these contributions. After the initial brainstorming, we also invited our colleagues to add plus signs to items to emphasize agreement on things that they felt to be a high priority, whether internally or externally, or for the dream category that they would like to see emphasized in a future plan.
Right. So we use those digital departmental exercises as the launchpad for an in-person management council retreat in December 2021, where we started the transition from the discover and dream part of the process to the preliminary design phase. We charged our department heads to review the results of their department's discover and dream exercises, organizing their responses into similar themes. And for the discover category, they then sorted their responses into 3 categories: what is recommended to be improved or expanded upon, what needs to be maintained or continued, and what might we do less of or de-emphasize. Here's an action shot from, everybody loves a good post-it noting action shot. It's worth sharing that this is the first time in nearly 2 years that the library's management team had been in the same space together in person. And although we could have done some of this work remotely and asynchronously, it was immensely valuable for us to be able to engage with each other in 3 dimensions around this work. So Kathryn and I took the output from the library's management council retreat, and we and the kind of ultimate goal of that retreat was to take the sort of departmental input and then identify where our overlaps were. How could we craft a plan that was actually not structured by departmental silos? Where were the themes that we could see touching across all of our work, and then organizing our first draft of our plan accordingly. So we completed this draft in January 2022, and then in February and March, we undertook a series of stakeholder feedback sessions. We met with all library staff. We had a presentation with the faculty library committee. We met with, we actually developed a survey to share with all of the library student employees that invited them to review the plan and share their feedback. We had meetings with the Associated Students of LMU, which is the undergraduate governing body, and the graduate students of LMU. And then finally, we had a meeting with the University Strategic Planning Advisory Council, which is who we were accountable to presenting our kind of final unit level plan. At each of these meetings, we shared the draft plan in advance of the meetings, and then we used the following questions to facilitate the discussions. We asked for their overall impressions. We asked if it reflected what, for the library staff, we asked, does this reflect what we want to accomplish? For the various other stakeholders, we asked what opportunities you see in the plan for you and your role, your department, or their unique positionality as a stakeholder in the library. What are you excited about and what's missing? Note that we made the decision, and this was largely due to the deadline that we had for the plan being due to university administration. We decided to engage with these groups after we already had a draft of the strategic plan that we largely developed in-house. But another approach could have been to include them in the discover and dream phases of the plan development. And I think it could have been really valuable to see how ideas might have been surfaced that weren't unearthed through our in-house discussions. But that said, their feedback during the design phase of the plan, it still helped us to reflect and make adjustments to the draft that was connected to user needs. So in May 2022, we officially adopted Hannon Library's new strategic plan. Yay! But now what? How do we activate it? How do we avoid falling into the same habits of inconsistent engagement with the plan that Kathryn introduced earlier? And how do we keep staff connected with it at the same level that we did throughout the planning process? So in the first year of this new strategic plan, Kathryn and I started a process of intermittent check-ins with department heads outside of our regularly scheduled management council meetings for increased connection and accountability around the plan. The original intent of these check-ins was to review progress on actions, timelines, and to continue the sticky work of identifying ways to measure our progress. This helped us get into the flow of more regular engagement around the strategic plan, amidst the operational work that consumes most of our colleagues' time. And that's what tends to draw people away from thinking about the plan, because we're like, we just got to get our stuff done. We'll worry about that when it's time to do annual reporting. But the real transformation for us in terms of truly activating the plan was because of the decision that came down from on high at the university. In late 2022, the university administration invested in a new enterprise system for Cascade for tracking progress on the university's strategic plan. Do any of the attendees have anything like this that your university is requiring that you're using? I'm curious if that shows up in any of your work. So this is a really complicated, sexy system that involved lots of consultants. And Kathryn and I, as the library's strategic plan stewards, we were trained on how to use the system, which required us to track and share progress on the plan in the system, starting with the 2022-2023 academic year. So the university paid for all of the importing of each unit level plan into the system. So when we were trained, our plan was already there based on what we had submitted. And the system itself has a multitude of options for tracking and visualizing progress on actions, goals, and objectives, including percent completion, milestones, and narrative submissions, all in service of a consistent annual reporting. This screenshot shows one small section of our plan from Cascade from a mid-year check-in and with the percentage completion on various actions. So we were only allowed to have, I think, Kathryn, did we have 2 logins? Like there were a very limited number of people who were given permission to actually use Cascade. So department heads did not have a responsibility to do their input in the system. That was and is one of Kathryn's primary responsibilities. So the new system required a new approach, and it really presented a new opportunity for us to manage the process of reporting and check-ins internally. So the first thing that we did was to shift the check-in meetings from department heads reporting on their unit's progress to convening interdepartmental stakeholder meetings organized around the goals. So this included librarians and staff who may have leadership responsibilities for various initiatives that were reflected in the plan, but didn't have a seat at the table at the library's management council. This improved awareness and information sharing across the departments. And really, this was the transformative shift that bolstered the original intent of our plan design, which was explicitly not organized around functional areas. So this is an example of what we shared with each of the internal stakeholder groups in advance of each scheduled meetings. The prompts changed slightly depending on what point of the academic year we were at. So for example, the May meetings had more of an emphasis on progress towards completion for the year that was behind us as we were gearing up towards submitting our annual reports in Cascade. Whereas the screenshot that you see here was a prompt, that was closer, it was right before the beginning of the academic year. So it was asking more about, does this reflect what you're going to be moving towards this year? If not, what needs to change? What will we adjust? So we expected our colleagues to come prepared to contribute to these conversations, and most of these meetings were highly productive. But highly productive check-in meetings also meant that there was a lot of content to organize and track. This is a lot of notes. This is a lot of tracking recommendations and action items, and we need to loop back around with that sorts of things. So it required some careful version control and attention to a system of migrating notes, action items, recommendations, and how they ultimately impacted changes to the master strategic plan. So Kathryn is an absolute mastermind at doing this, and I still miss working with her every single day. For a lot of reasons, but that's absolutely one of them. Our internal tracking was all done through notes in Word, the strategic plan itself in Excel, and a series of folders in Box that were organized by goal groups. All of this was very much worth it. These are a few of the benefits that we experienced from our seats in library administration as the stewards of the plan. First and foremost, I think the regular check-ins kept the plan alive with opportunities to adjust along the way. The first bullet's really where we've been most successful. Over the last 4 years, the LMU Library Strategic Plan has remained a living document that accurately reflects the priorities of the library in alignment with the university strategic plan. But we have had, and my goodness, if I'm remembering correctly, we have utilized and continue to utilize the flexibility to adjust it based on new opportunities or unexpected barriers that folks encounter along the way. We also developed new templates and a new process for department annual reporting that was aligned with the strategic planning. And all of this is moving in the direction of the May process that we have, or the process that we have in May every single year to submit in Cascade. This also converges with the end of the fiscal year. It converges with annual review season. It converges with graduation and commencement, all of this. And all of this has really supported, I think, a much less onerous load for both department heads and library administration for year-end reporting, because we have been working towards this over the course of an entire year. And then another kind of final bonus, and this is something I think that there still can be some good work done in service of, but we did notice over the last 2 years an increase in librarians connecting the strategic plans in their individual annual review narratives. LMU still doesn't have a required template or format or method that every librarian is expected to use to connect their work to the strategic plan. But because of the way the plan was designed and through these check-ins, more librarians can see their work reflected in the plan, and it is a lot easier for them to report and make those connections in their individual annual reviews as well. Here's a little bit of feedback from two of our, what happened to the text there?
Yeah, I'm
That
sorry,
got
this
kind of
got
wonky.
messed up. Yeah.
Yeah. Some feedback from two of our department head colleagues around their experience with the strategic plan through the process. So the first is the regular check-ins with leads was essential for keeping us focused on the finish line. I don't know that we would have completed as much of the plan as we did had there not been the biannual status updates. You made it easy for us to show up and accomplish what we could and needed to do. And then this same colleague shared that he found it valuable to hear from other department heads. It was beneficial to see the strategic plan through their eyes and their workflows. Another department head shared that focusing on DEIA helped staff to look at their individual and departmental roles from a specific lens and to develop plans to support the common theme. Prioritization was easy, and I really appreciated admin's reiteration of achievable actions and initiatives and checking in about priorities. This last one felt really good. This librarian has been at LMU for a couple of decades, and so this was nice to hear that she thought it was the most successful plan she'd ever worked on and wouldn't change a thing. You did the heavy lifting. Sorry and thank you. So you made it easy for us to show up and accomplish what we could and needed to do. And then this last one is a particularly fancy feather in our cap. This was some feedback that we received through correspondence with the university president's right-hand man, who is the strategic planning lead for the university. The library has their unit plan organized better than most. We actually used the library's plan as our exemplar when we demonstrated Cascade for the Board of Trustees. This didn't result in like just a windfall of more money for the library's budget or anything like that, but it was also very nice to hear and like a really great affirmation of the work that we were doing.
With all that praise behind us, there are still also some areas that we'd love to improve on. And we've seen some presentations here at Calm that have definitely also given us inspiration for our next steps. As we're going through these last few slides, please feel free to drop any resources or presentations that you've found helpful in the chat. First, our revised strategic planning check-in process helped to reduce some silos as we were able to meet and talk about related objectives together in an interdepartmental group, but we could still improve on that in the future. We'd love to build a more robust practice of interdepartmental collaboration for this strategic work. The presentation from the Davidson College folks yesterday about great ideas was definitely inspiring for this. We also noted an issue with frequency of communication back to all library staff. As we reduced the frequency of meeting as a library to rework the plan, we could have increased the communication about our accomplishments and the progress being discussed in the goal group check-ins. Because those groups were smaller, we just kind of didn't always get that information out to everyone. We would also love to improve on our scoping for future plans. We tend to be ambitious about what could be accomplished, and these check-ins showed us that sometimes we can overextend ourselves, especially as we pick up new projects over the course of a plan, especially when key people are involved in multiple objectives across the plan. And then also over the course of the plan, especially once we implemented the goal group check-ins, we were able to discuss what completion looked like or what operationalizing an initiative looked like through the check-ins. But because we didn't start with those check-ins at the start of the plan, there was definitely some room for us to build in benchmarks and measuring impact earlier in our process to identify what those things would look like at the start of the plan, which would help us schedule out any needed assessment pieces and make it easier to evaluate our progress over the course of the plan. And then finally, I saw some conversation in the chat about this, letting things go. This is still an area we struggle with. Even in the Discover and Dream exercises, we had an option to put a minus next to things that we should do less of, and people mostly didn't use it. So it's a struggle, I think, for all of us to evaluate what is useful and what is working, especially when we are doing things we enjoy doing. In another theme, this was definitely a theme from several presentations at Calm this week. So we want to continue to work on how and when to scale back, whether that's strategic or operational tasks. We hope that measuring our impact may help us to identify what initiatives are more effective and supportive of student success and help us to focus on that impact. And then finally, here are some takeaways. The check-ins really helped us keep the plan alive and in front of us, but they did require a fair amount of time. As conveners, we cleaned up the plan, tracked what had happened last time, checked in about any lingering questions from the prior meeting in the next meeting. As stakeholders, attendees had to check in with others in their department, bring any concerns or questions back to the group, and keep those actions alive in the interim. And because it demands a lot of time, these meetings need to be useful and they need library administration support to continue to happen. But a variation of this may be useful in smaller groups if you aren't able to incorporate it at those higher levels. A similar model might be useful within a department or a project group as well. These groups became a place to have deeper discussions and to reflect on how the plan we initially wrote was working or not working for us, and also just to learn, kind of support each other in learning how strategic planning worked over the course of the planning process. Check-ins became a space to discuss what was realistic, what was strategic, and how to scale and measure our goals in a meaningful way. They also helped us to identify places where the right people were not in the room. There were places where we added stakeholders to those check-in meetings as we went because we realized that we had missed someone who was working significantly on one of these projects. And then we could invite them for the future. Making this work iterative and continuous, although it required spending more time, also meant strategic planning could hopefully be less daunting and remain alive to us over the course of the plan.
Yeah, I've been thinking of it, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I've been thinking about this a lot from the different positionality that I have at my new place of work. I was a top level administrator that at LMU that had a lot of authority and agency um, to make this process happen. But without the operational responsibilities or the middle management responsibilities that middle managers are squeezed in. So from my new position, I have a lot more. Maybe I don't know if a lack of empathy was my problem at LMU, but I have a lot more empathy for the precarity and the challenge that those of us who are middle managers have in kind of walking that tightrope between making sure that you are moving a plan forward, but then also recognizing that you're squeezed a lot more in the operational side of the house. So in my new role, I don't have as much agency or authority, or it's really not my job to determine the strategic planning structure for the entire library. But we're in the middle of a reorg here at UCLA. I'm leading a team through this, and I'm thinking a lot about how aspects of this work are mappable and applicable from where my sphere of influence is. So I think one of the major, like, this is maybe one of the most important takeaways is that this is an iterative process, and in order for it to be successful, it always needs to be iterative. This takes time, it takes care, and it takes repetition. Um, you're never done with strategic planning. I mean, I'm actually really excited to kind of see and hear how the next cycle of strategic planning goes at LMU, because I do think that those takeaways with kind of normalizing this idea of strategic goals and KPIs and measuring impact, if we can normalize it, we can make it less daunting, and we can make it a part of the work that we do on a daily or weekly basis. So I'm excited to see what the impact is and to hear how the process goes at LMU, because of the care that was taken to bring everybody along over the last few years, and to see what we can do with this at UCLA also. So last couple slides are just a few of our resources. This is the citation for the fantastic article that really influenced the process that we took. We started with back in 2021. And then we have a box folder that has an Excel template that has two of our goals, one of the goals with actual language in it, and then another one that's sort of a blank template, if that's of interest to anybody. And then we have the script for the check-in meetings as well. If there's anything else that we referred to throughout the course of the presentation today that you think would be useful for us to add to the folder, please, please go ahead and you can drop a note in the chat, and we'll make note of that and add it to the folder. Or you can drop me or Kathryn a note afterwards too. That's the end of our scripted presentation. So thank you for your awesome comments and commentary and emoji reactions and everything. I think we're a little ahead of time, but we've got some good time for questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Jamie and Kathryn. Let's go ahead and take time for those questions. Please be sure to type your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll answer them as they come in. So let's go for our first question, which is, can you give a bit more information about the org structure at LMU during this period? If Jamie was the AD, what did the Dean's Cabinet leadership team look like? How did they impact this process, or were you given carte blanche to proceed as you wished?
I can start with the answer to that. So the LMU leadership team is the dean, the associate. There would be one associate dean, who's the current associate dean is actually speaking right now at a different session. Um, but and then Kathryn was the operations manager at that time. And then you're going to have to help me with this, Kathryn, how many department heads serve on management council?
I always have to subtract us. I think there are
Yeah.
6 others.
Yeah, so
to
there's not a
probably have.
separate dean's cabinet or council, and the associate dean, one of the primary job responsibilities is the lead for the structure and the kind of management of the strategic plan at LMU. So the dean was and a supporter, and we were reporting all of this to her as well. So we had her support for this entire process.
Yeah, there was
Is that
definitely
helpful?
more,
Yeah.
yeah, more behind the scenes check-ins with all of that. But we tried to do this management council retreat, like Jamie alluded to, because of COVID and because of the time frame, we were doing a lot of this asynchronously and by Zoom. So any of those in-person meetings were very helpful to get all 9 of us together in a room.
Yeah. But in terms of answering the question, though, we did have carte blanche that was really our charge, was to make this happen and for the library.
Yeah.
And we did have we had a lot of there at the beginning of the I don't know if any of our department heads are watching this today, but but we did have there's a little bit of grumbling about the frequency of the meetings at first, but once we got into the oh, hi John.
John deserves credit because John also did a lot of this work with us.
Yes. So, so there was a little bit of grumbling at the beginning, but I think that we really were successful at being able to bring folks around to seeing the value of these.
I'm pretty sure John's
Awesome.
name is actually on the facilitator ether pads earlier
Yeah.
on.
Oh, nice. Okay, so our next question. I'm intrigued by the idea of librarians connecting their annual review to the strategic plan. Do you have non-librarian staff as well who might connect their annual reviews to it? Also curious whether staff were involved in the strategic plan check-ins and slash process.
Yeah, I'll try and tackle it since I'm on the staff side. So yes, I think we saw some of the same variation between staff about how much they connected their performance evaluations to the strategic plan. We at LMU, we actually have kind of a split process in that the librarians follow more of a faculty model of annual reviews, and then the staff follow more of the typical it's in workday, you fill out a form sort of process. So it does look very different for both of us, but I do think that there was some linking on both sides. I know mine was always covered in strategic plan things, but I'm sure that's just part of my job also. Um, but I do think, and staff were to some extent involved in those stakeholder, the check-in, goal check-in meetings. Um, I think that it depended on their role, and also we didn't want to make the groups super big. So sometimes if it was something where they were working as part of the team, but not the one leading it, then they might not have been as involved. But for example, our document delivery supervisor was involved in the uh, stakeholder groups because of the sort of interlibrary loan of it all being very specific to that staff member position. Um, so yeah, it varied. And I do think one of the things we did at the sort of conclusion of this plan was we asked departments to talk to their staff and see if there were people who wished they had been more involved in this plan and maybe felt like they wanted to be more involved next time. So that's something we can look at too.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we identified that could be an area for improvement, but that's kind of striking that balance between how much we try to micromanage how department heads engage with their staff, because ideally what we would like is when one of these meetings is coming up, then the department head knows this is coming. Hey, I've got this meeting with Kathryn and Sarah, and um, this is what I need to bring to the table, and really engaging with their team so that when they're coming to the table, their staff and their teams are being seen and reflected and heard in how it's being presented. But um, we we're not micromanaging that. So I think that's a cultural kind of thing to try and bring along. And then, Kathryn, did you mention the challenge with the staff annual review process just being so different? But yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
a big chunk
yeah,
of it is so like the way that staff do it, there's like a self-evaluation piece that in which you put what you've done, things like that for the year. But it's very fixed questions. It's, what did you do this year? What were your strengths? What were your weaknesses? Things like that. Like it's a little bit more controlled. So it's not always a great, it's not asking specifically about
Yeah.
what did you do for the strategic plan or what are your goals next time? I mean, even the goals piece, they're kind of still struggling to include that appropriately.
Yeah.
So
And the remainder of the review process is around university competencies that are tagged to that particular job classification. And this is the case at UCLA as well. So the staff reviews have the university level HR template, whereas the librarian reviews are really tailored and really customized for the needs of the library. So trying to bridge those two, I think, is a challenge, but it's an important one to consider.
Thank you for that. Um, this kind of falls in the same line of just kind of staff and how that worked out with the plan. Did you ever encounter people that were pushing back against measurement in general, feeling like maybe it was surveillance or performance judgment as opposed to an opportunity to learn from and adapt in response to results?
I don't know if it was Jamie, you can correct me if I'm not thinking of
Yeah.
something, but I don't think that generally the pushback was resistance to that tracking kind of piece. I think sometimes it was really legitimately like, we don't know how to assess whether this is complete. We don't know. We're not really sure. Like when we set this as a goal, we're not really sure how we were supposed to measure whether this was set or has progressed to the level that we wanted it to. Um, and I think that's a piece that we've definitely flagged for our next strategic plan is building that assessment capacity, because that's a piece that people really kind of hit a wall with a lot of times. But yeah, Jamie, I don't know if you have thoughts.
I don't think so. I think that exactly what you said, rather than resistance, it really is just skill building around it and trying to make it less daunting. And I think there's some departments that, the departments that have the more quantitative ways of measuring their progress and the impact of their work on the library and, how to measure their work is have an easier job of it. And then others, like I'll put John on the spot again. John Jackson is our head of outreach. The LMU's head of outreach, and he's done a lot of work with trying to measure impact and belonging, and how it's just not nearly as straightforward as, like, stats that you can export from Alma.
Yeah. Yeah. And those then become like a whole extra project that you need to put into the strategic plan to do. And
Yeah,
it's kind of like a circle.
right.
Thank you. And then this next one, they were curious if you got feedback from groups like student government that you consulted with earlier in the process.
I think overall our feedback from the student groups was very positive. This was during a time when the library had really kind of recently reopened. And so some of it was really just an opportunity for us to have conversations about what the library offered to them. I mean, library services and the sort of just building a relationship again. Um, Jamie, I don't know if you remember anything specific from those conversations that came out of it about the strategic plan.
I don't.
Yeah, I know it was forever ago. We were having this conversation as we were planning for this. It's like, when was 2021?
Yeah.
That makes sense. But remembering positive is good. So that's a good vibe to carry with you. Um, the next question is, do you have a process for dealing with an initiative that maybe no longer makes sense or maybe is no longer feasible in a strategic plan?
Yes, and we were pretty flexible about this in our strategic planning process. There were definitely places where we said, oh, we added this big thing and we need to postpone something, or maybe this sub-action kind of never made sense and it needs to get taken out. But I do think like the size mattered. Like it was easier for us to take something out that was a sub-action than to take something out that was bigger than that. Um, and I do think that there's a need for us to make that more of a conversation in future plans in terms of, like what things are changing and what impacts that has on everyone else. I've really enjoyed watching some of the presentations about making that happen.
Yeah, that was another area that I was thinking about a lot during the Davidson librarian's presentation around the process they use to kind of submit or to collect ideas and proposals that would impact the priorities of that had the potential to impact the priorities of the library that year. I thought that was a really interesting process, and I'm curious what that might look like to kind of shift that process of prioritizing and identifying what to let things go. Like, one of the biggest disruptors. It was a fantastic disruptor that we had in the 2021 to 2020 or 2022 to 2026 LMU plan. Was after the plan was complete. About 6 months or 8 months later, we got a giant grant from the Department of Education for an OER initiative. And that had not been reflected in the plan. It had not been a part of my work or the dean's work or the other co-PI who was our head of our collection development librarian. And all of a sudden, that just shifted everything. And that was actually, I think, a really good example of something that needed to be integrated into the plan. It needed to be reflected. It needed to be reported up to the university. And we could have done more in terms of that minus, what really needs to change strategically, not just operationally, in order to make the space for something like that. So um, again, I think that the letting go is the tricky part. And if there's anybody here who has figured out how to do that effectively, like, we'd love to hear it.
I'd love to hear it too for what it's worth.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. The next question is there's a lot of fear in academic libraries right now, lots of reorgs, lots of deans who are building plans less collaboratively and openly than you described. Jamie, it's specifically for you. You're at UCLA now. Do you have any thoughts on extensibility? Are you using this process in your new role slash institution? And a big hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. I've shared this presentation with my associate university librarian. I am trying to kind of strike that balance between staying in my lane. I'm the department head for a new team that has been reorged. We're about 1 month into, actually, exactly. I think April 14th was the first day of the convening of the new teams, and so we're in the middle of a lot of change. And I am I'm thinking about and trying to apply aspects of this in the process for goal setting for our new team, and thinking about how I'm going to be working with my team leads to keep our goals and our objectives active. So I think that there's something that, where I've got my sphere of influence, I would like to use this. I'd like to use it to model. And I also like to, I think it's a really exciting opportunity to kind of test it. What worked at LMU may work really differently here, but I think it's very much worth adapting and trying. So we haven't undertaken the strategic planning process for the library yet. The reorg is taking shape over the course of a couple of, at least about 18 months, and it'll be interesting to see where it can make connections.
Fingers are definitely crossed for you.
Thank you.
Um, Yeah, our final question, unless anybody wants to add another one, but they would love insights on effective strategies for socializing a strategic plan at many levels of the library. So, any insights you have on that?
And I think this is still something we're working on, but I do think, I think that the Discover and Dream exercise was really helpful in terms of it being a much less scary planning piece for the strategic plan. I think a lot of people felt a little bit alienated from the more businessy strategies that we were using in the past, in that, it was just like, this is not my job. I don't know what we're doing right now, kind of thing. So I do think that planning piece was helped with some less scary exercises. But then in terms of the next steps, I don't know, Jamie. I'm run out of thoughts.
Yeah, I think, I mean, going back to that wash, rinse, repeat thing. I think that doing the reflection around the plan and thinking about socializing it, I think the department heads have a really more of an important role to play in many ways than the administrators do in the socialization of it. So if there are I'm not saying there are at LMU, but at any individual, any place, if there are department heads who aren't on board with it or who aren't engaging their teams with it in the way that needs to happen, how do you identify what the barriers are there and help them to move through it in a productive way? So but I think that the effort to connect everybody's individual roles with where we're going is just it's so worth it, but it's not easy.
It's not.
No.
I appreciated you both nodding to those who do more operational day to day and that struggle with connecting them to some of these more strategic, bigger picture. I had shared with our presenters earlier that I'm in the middle of strategic planning myself, and that's probably the first challenge I came across. Yeah,
Yeah.
but
And we found like the nice thing about incorporating that DEIA piece was that it really did help with like inclusive strategies around the library. So including it in metadata, including um, thinking about thesauri for cataloging, thinking about,
mm,
various ways that you can incorporate that. We looked at our group study rooms, we looked at all sorts of technology pieces for circulation. So it kind of helped think about that a little bit more directly, I guess. It made it feel like it was incorporated. Um,
But I think you just touched on one of the major challenges with any, especially thinking about librarian promotion and peer review, is what gets rewarded. There's at some institutions, I know at UCLA, this has been a challenge where there's been, folks who feel like they only get rewarded for the innovative and the strategic. And,
yeah,
you know, kind of going back to some of Meredith's work, what about the maintainers? We can't do our work without the maintainers, and how do we recognize and uplift the value of that work in connection to our strategic plans?
yeah.
Like they're not separate.
yeah. Well, we just had to submit our impact report for the last 5 years of the plan. And one of the things that I was super struck by was how much work our collections management team had done to reorganize our basement storage so we had more space in our basement. We went from 80% full to like 55% full. Like it's amazing. And it's not the kind of work that you usually talk about.
Yeah.
But it's
Gotta
really
remember this.
connected to the annual budget
Yes.
requests.
Yeah.
We did get another question in. Were there any goals that gained support or consensus across the teams in terms of importance, and yet teams took little ownership of the goal? What strategies do you have for addressing teams that make little to no progress on a goal, especially when it's a prioritized institutional goal?
Oh gosh. You know what comes to mind, Kathryn, is actually where we struggled the most, at least while I was still there, was around we had a goal that was really about kind of internal climate and culture. And that we, we had the hardest I think we really, really struggled with how to move that forward um, actionably, I guess. I feel like that when we were doing our own check-in sessions, we kept going, wait a second, why are we stuck here? Why are we stuck here? And in some ways, I think that's where we got bogged down in some of that was our operational work that we were just we I don't have a better way to say it other than we just kind of struggled with it. So I'm not remembering that there was actually any of the other departments that had significant challenges with moving forward because of these check-ins. Like there weren't any major goals or objectives that progress was not being made on because a team didn't have buy-in. Like if there wasn't progress, it was usually because we lost a position, or not, we didn't lose a position, but somebody, there was turnover and there was a vacancy and this got derailed because of this, right? Like there were usually legitimate reasons why we didn't make
I do think,
progress.
I mean, one of the other pieces that sometimes fed into this feeling of people not taking ownership was scoping. Because we had some goals that were so big or like even not even goals, actions, that were so broadly written, that we struggled to identify what we were doing for it, and then therefore struggled to identify who those people were who were going to do that work. Um, Speaking to that DEIA piece, there were pieces of our DEIA stuff that was really integrated into every goal and different objectives. And then there were pieces that were just assess everything in the library for
Yeah.
DEIA. And
Or
that's
like do
not
DEIA. There wasn't actually one that said do DEIA, but there were a couple that we did not scope appropriately. And I think that that's like the kind of lessons learned in crafting a new plan.
yeah, because it's hard to say, please do this, even hand this to a committee or something like that when it's like we haven't really named what we want yet. So those are the things we'd really like to work on.
That makes complete sense. I think we're, as a library, very aspirational. So that's what I like to say. It's not that we forgot to scope it. We're just so aspirational. We just want to do all the things.
Definitely.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Jamie and Kathryn, for answering all those questions and for an amazing presentation. It was truly a pleasure to have you with us today. Before we close the session, I would like to point out the evaluation survey that is available for you to complete. I'm certain the presenters here today and other presenters throughout the other sessions that you've either already attended or will be attending would very much appreciate your feedback. You can find a link to the evaluation in Sketch. It's labeled feedback survey and is directly above the session description. With that said, thank you, Jamie and Kathryn, again, and thank you all for attending. And we hope you've enjoyed this presentation and enjoyed the final day of calm. Thank you, everyone.
You.
Take care.